You're listening to Dropping Pins, a story-based learning series from the Okayest Hunter podcast, hosted by Derek Melkor, and aimed at helping you hone your whitetail hunting skills. You'll hear the aha moments when known and unknown proven whitetail killers started consistently putting mature bucks on the ground.
All right, good afternoon, everybody, from the Dropping Pins basement of my house. Welcome to the podcast, part of the Okayest Hunter podcast network. Dropping Pins, if you haven't caught any of our previous episodes, is a story-based educational learning style podcast in which we talk to some tried and true big buck killers, and we try to pull some stories from them that kind of helped focus their hunting career or their hunting success in a direction that maybe they weren't going before they had these moments. So that's the idea. Today we've got another Wisconsin guest on. So I got my Cheesehead Green Bay Packers shirt on. We got a guy who's really honed in and focused his skills in the last 5 years on targeting and killing some really good mature bucks. You may have seen some of his hunts. He does some recording on public Land Whitetails with Cody Hoon, his channel on YouTube, or The Hunting Beast, or even Before the Echo, Josh Tulker's channel on YouTube. He's been on multiple podcasts, a wealth of knowledge, especially more recently in some of the hill country hub systems. I've heard him talk a lot on that. Really good stuff. He's killed darn near 35 bucks, largely off of public land. So definitely a testament to his woodsmanship and knowledge. And our guest today has that woodsmanship piece, which I think will be interesting, and maybe we'll touch on, because he was a trapper for a long time and ran a large number of traps on multiple animals. And one of the things that we're kind of seeing is people who spend a lot of time trapping and thinking about how to put that animal's foot or body in the perfect position translates really well into getting after mature deer. So today we're lucky enough to be joined by Gary Grunow. Gary, thanks for dealing with all my tomfoolery here. Welcome.
No problem.
Yeah, man, we laugh about it on the main Okayest Hunter show, because every time we fire up, Eric's got some kind of issue he's working through, and I'm like, man, why can't he get it together? And then every time I do this, multiple issues. I'm way worse at it than Eric is. So
there's a lot that goes on for these podcasts, right?
More than a guy would think. It's like, oh, you got a device and you plug it in and go. But
right,
I've just struggled.
Yeah, not a problem.
Yeah, so it's great to have you. If I missed anything that you want to point out to our listeners, feel free. But in talking to Gary before the podcast a little bit, it turns out we actually live fairly close together and probably have almost crossed paths in some of the public lands here in southeastern Wisconsin.
Yes, we're only probably about 20 minutes away from each other, which I didn't realize. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. So we'll see. Yeah. Maybe I'll pick up some of your hot spots here.
No, it's not a problem. I'm fine with that. But yeah. You touched on a lot of it. My past, my dad brought me up as a brown it's down hunter, and then I got rid of my traps about 10 years ago. Ran 300 traps, which is a significant line. There was 3 actual lines that I actually would run, but wanted to focus more on my passion, which is bow hunting. And this last 8 years has been a whirlwind of just learning, and just trial and tribulation. So I've been lucky enough to been pretty successful these last 5 years.
Well, I think it goes to show anyone who's maybe, followed you along and saw any of the videos. I mean, you can tell when people really dive in, and you seem like the all-in kind of guy. I mean, you mentioned that you had gone to a hunting beast workshop with Dan Infalt and kind of had some moments there where things started to click. And then since then, seems like you've, got into out-of-state hunting and put yourself in multiple scenarios that kind of force you to learn and think outside of your box. And I think that's a testament to the success you just mentioned.
Yeah. And that actually kind of leads into one of my aha moments, I believe, is there's a piece of property near me that has a river system that goes through it. And about 8 years ago is when I actually started trying to learn this area. It's kind of actually tough. It's just a river system that's public and then surrounded by private. And there's all these open fields and woodlots, or I shouldn't say woodlots, tree lines and stuff that, man, it's hard to figure these bucks out and how they're using them. But something that it's kind of funny how this went. A couple of years ago, I was talking to a guy. He swung by my house. I think he was buying a tree stand or something from me. And the area that I hunt over here actually used to be private land, and this guy used to lease it.
Oh, really?
And I was just chit chatting and whatever. He doesn't hunt public anymore. He's kind of, got that cushy private land. And uh, I I was just shooting the crap with him, and I'm like, hey, he knew exact spots that I was hunting, and we started chit chatting and stuff. And I said something about, I just can't, I just haven't totally figured this out yet. But I walk up and down this river system, and I'm seeing all these buck rubs in the river, like they had to be in the river rubbing that edge. And I said, I actually think that they might be using that river to go from the private bedding through the public into the private crops, because they have to go through that public at some point. And he's like, and he starts laughing. He's like, you're absolutely right. He says, one of my best stands during rut was on the river. He said, I had a stand that I would hunt the river. Now, this river, in some spots is probably 50 yards across, but it's only about a foot deep. And I thought about it. And of course, the next day I went back in that river. I didn't push and prod just too much, but I jumped in that river and I went back up and down. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Why did I not see this before? I mean, it was right in front of my face. Sure enough, these deer.
Now, just to clarify, you're not talking about a river crossing? I mean, a lot of guys key in on
Correct.
crossings. Are you talking about the deer actually
They're
moving like
walking.
a traveled
Yeah.
corridor?
Yep. Absolutely. And I'm just going to myself, what the heck? Why didn't I see this before? Why didn't I think of this? Like, why? And it makes sense. If you think about it, all these deer crossings, all these doe trails and deer crossings that cross the river and stuff, during the rut, those bucks like to run perpendicular, right? They want to scent check all those cross trails. So what's the easiest way to go from point A to point B? We'll walk the river. He can smell every crossing there is in a matter of an hour and be able to smell any hot doe. And I was like, oh my God, there was my aha moment. I was like, so kind of I kind of went back and I started doing a lot more research, and I found an oxbow system where they're bedding in. And 2 years ago on opening day, I decided to kind of squeeze that oxbow system, try to catch them coming back to their bedding area. And sure enough, it's about 9 in the morning, and it's getting hot out. Our opener's mid-September here for any non-Wisconsin people, so it is pretty warm. But usually by that 9 o'clock, the deer movement is pretty down to nothing. And so I thought, all right, well, I'm going to pull my stand down. So I get down to the base of the tree, unhook everything. All of a sudden, I look up and there's two mature bucks standing there 30 yards away that were coming back to bedding. I was like,
So
ah,
were they coming into the oxbow that you were hunting?
yeah, yeah.
How close were you to the water in your stand? Were you like kind of hunting like where that oxbow
At
enters?
that time, I was like 50 yards away from the water. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Oh,
so I started really pushing in a little bit. Now, last year, I put a couple cameras on the river, literally on the river, and man, did I catch deer. I mean, I was getting right around 40 pictures a day
wow.
of deer walking up and down that river system. So now, just recently here, it was last week. I went in there and I put a cell camera in there. Now I'm curious. It's a mile and a half back to get back there, so it isn't for the faint of heart. So I decided to put a cell camera in there, and that very day I already got deer walking up and down that river. I got some bucks moving up and down. But while I was in there, see, we had a lot of rain here, if you already know, and those river systems flooded, and it kicked up a lot of silt this year, more silt than normal. So when I was walking in the river, I could literally see a white path, like a deer trail, because that's the only place where the silt got kicked up. And there was a deer trail in the river walking up and down. And I'm like, I had to do a video of it. I actually put it on my story reel or whatever on Facebook and Instagram. It's hard to really see, but I was just like, people, keep your eyes open. I mean, sometimes as simple as something like this really can change the way you look at a piece of property and how they're using it.
That's
So,
that brings up a lot of interesting things because we've all,
mhm,
anyone who spent some time in the woods or, wet areas, swampy areas, southern half of Wisconsin, the stuff that you and I are hunting now, it's like you can gauge when a deer has moved through an area by how muddy, if there's, you know, sediment that's turned up in the water, that deer just walked through there not that long ago because then all
yeah,
that silt settles. But finding actual trails through the silt is a really cool and interesting thing. And that's
yeah,
probably not going to be on every river or body of water. It's dependent. You said the silt is up, but man, take advantage of what you're being given. And that's pretty
right.
awesome that you could see the trail right through the silt.
Yeah, in that particular spot, it's a mile and a half back in off the nearest road. And about 5 miles away, there's another spot similar to it. It comes off of there's a river, the same river actually comes, but it's a lot narrower. It's only probably about 15, 20 feet wide in this area. And it is a barrier of bushes and thick stuff on both sides of it. Just, it's horrible to try to get through. And there's a parking area and a road, and where these deer are bedding is on a piece of private that people don't allow hunting, and they're coming off this piece, and they have to go through public to get to these private fields, but they have to go through public, and all these guys are on the outside edges of the thick stuff hoping that they come out, including me at a couple of
Yeah,
times trying to just kind of, I was getting some pictures of good bucks, but I was like, how are they using this, how are they getting through? And last year, same thing, I put a camera in an area, and it's real tough. I actually have it, like, this is the only camera that I put out of, I run like almost 100 cameras that I put like belly button high, because I can't find a tree where I can get clear enough picture. But this particular spot, it's the camera's hitting really good. Man, I left it sit, let it, it was a soaker, and I pulled the camera this last winter, and there was like 2,000 pictures on that camera of deer
wow.
walking up and down that river. And I was just like, now I know how they're getting from that bedding area to those private fields. So, of course, I just put that camera up this last week when I did the other camera, and I had to clear out a spot. Uh, there's a bunch of ash, dead ash and stuff that I kind of had to clear out. So there's one tree, I'll get like a 15-yard shot.
To the
That's,
water.
yeah, to the water. So there's two crossings right there, but most of them are going up and down the river. So now I know, okay, well, no wonder I can't figure out where they're at, because they're in the river. Like, it's crazy. You would never know. You can't, it's really rocky right there, so you can't even see deer trails in that spot. But that camera, man, I love doing those soaker cameras, and it gives me a lot of intel. I may not hunt it that year, but the next year I'll have a good idea how they're using it.
That's such an interesting thing. And I don't know that I've ever thought about a river being set up quite like that. And I mean, if you've got a smaller river or a creek that's making tons of twists and turns, it may not get used like that. But if you've got a stretch like what Gary's explaining, And when you first said, send checking the trails crossing, it's for those of you listening, maybe you don't have experience hunting by those river bodies, but if you think of like a straight edge of like a CRP grass field that's like the bedding area, and does are going in and out, and there's probably trails every 40, 50 yards where they go in and out depending on it. And a buck doesn't want to walk every one of those trails. But as Gary mentioned, he's going to run perpendicular. He's going to run on the outside edge, probably the downwind side, and he's going to smell all those trails. And that's exactly what Gary's doing with the creek crossings. Like he's checking, the buck is checking the creek crossings. And the other part that I thought was cool, um, a lot more when I hunt like up in the Northwoods in Nicolay, because down here there's so much open area that the wind swirl effect doesn't really happen that much.
Right.
But when I think about like your story, especially if it's a wider creek bottom, if there's solid canopy, you're saying it's like real thick on the sides. Not only is that a little harder for deer to walk in, but that's gonna, the wind's gonna come over the top and hit that open river channel and probably do some sort of swirl or pull down
Yep.
with the
It's going
current.
to pull down river. Yep.
So how that buck uses that in the morning or in the evening, he can also have some sort of sense advantage. And then early season, you can get away from bugs walking up and down the river rather than walking through that shit, which is probably
Right.
why you were walking up and down the river in the first place.
Well, here's another thing that to kind of remember on that too is that I'm finding a lot of mature buck beds on the edge of that river. And what they're doing is they're literally looking out away from the river, and they have their backs towards the river. And what they're doing is they're catching any scents that are going down that river and still being able to see out in case there's a human intrusion or whatever danger of some sort. All they got to do is turn around, jump in the river, and they're gone. So it's if you think about it, that's what a mature buck likes. And I actually found a good bed tucked underneath a tree there. I took a picture of it, but I didn't post it or anything. But I was just like, man, this is really cool stuff right here. It's a lot of fun. It's a change from my swamps and hill country that I normally hunt. So it's always exciting. But yeah, I I was close to getting. I was on a good one last year in this area, but I just didn't. I didn't. I do a lot of out of state hunting now, so I was constantly going back in there hunting them, coming back. It's one of those things, but it's
Now,
still a
I
lot of
gotta
fun.
I gotta ask with you mentioning that you run a lot of cameras. Um, with going back and forth out of state, and it sounds like, I mean, you're not just focusing on even on one public area here in Wisconsin. It sounds like you're kind of moving around and you got your wings spread over a large area to try to locate the buck you want. Are you running? I mean, those aren't all cell cameras. Are you going in
Oh
and
no.
are you checking cameras on your way in to hunt? Are you leaving most of them to soak for the season to gather intel for the next year? How are you kind of using those when you don't get to like be in the same spot over and over day after day after day after day?
So I'm here in my area, our area, it's either there's a mature buck there or there isn't. I mean, you just got to find where they're at. It's and they move around quite a bit in this area. So I spread my wings quite a bit. I have some that I call soakers. What I do is if it's a new area that I find intriguing, I'll scout it out in spring, try to figure out how they're using it. I'll put a camera up and I'll let it soak, like literally. And I use cheap cameras. I hang them high
Same
with
here.
good sits, mobile camera, hang on system. That is the best I've ever.
It's slick.
Oh yeah, yeah. If you guys are looking for legal public land legal trail camera hanging system, Good Sit has got what you're looking for. So, but anyways, I'll hang these cameras up and I'll let them soak, and I'll kind of get an idea because a lot of times these mature bucks will use that area the same way every year, and I'll let it soak, and then in wintertime I'll go back, I'll pull the camera and try to figure things out, how they're using it and what's going on. I have probably about 15 cell cameras, Tacticams, the original, the Gen 1s. I love them. Those things are awesome. But and those particular ones, it's really super hard to access areas out of state or places that are far away from me because I hunt up to a couple hours away from my house here. So that way I can kind of keep an idea of what's going on. I don't use the cameras to per se hunt the deer. I'll put them in areas. Usually I try to find a scrape or something, a community scrape, or maybe just outside a bedding area. And I'll kind of monitor if there's a good one in that area that I want to hunt. And sometimes they don't move in until, they do that switch here coming up, usually right around the end of August, beginning of September. All of a sudden they change up, their patterns change, food changes, everything changes. So I kind of set my cameras out for those things. Um, like right now, I don't get a lot of bucks on camera, but I don't anticipate getting them on camera until late August, beginning of September.
That's that's it's very similar to how I like to hang my cameras. I usually get them out in July, and we just made a video and put one up on the Okayest Hunter. I just took a little video of some spots I was hanging cameras, and the whole moral of the story was it's not to get the summer bucks. I'm not close to food. It's to
Right,
have a good month and a half where my area that I just intruded in on can settle down. And when the bucks shift into that area, I'm not going in there trying to hang cameras the week they move in there and all of a sudden they smell somebody and be like, yeah, maybe I want to shift a little bit more. So
right,
very similar to
right.
a lot of the ways I like to hang mine.
Well, you could get
Thanks for
away with
walking through
more right now because they haven't shifted to that area yet. I mean, everybody
it.
goes out and they love to see deer out in the fields and glassing and stuff. But I'll tell you what, mid September rolls around, they're not going to be there more than likely. So I
And it's
don't,
wild. You've hunted places on public that are close to ag, I'm sure. And I'm
yep,
not saying that you're never going to see a mature buck in there in daylight, but I know like some spots where I've hung cameras before are pretty damn far from any sort of ag, and they're still getting to these thick ass spots
yeah,
right at the edge of daylight. And it's like, well, if you're sitting a field edge 700 yards away, good luck.
especially in
And maybe there
Wisconsin,
are some other ones. I'm not saying I know where those deer are going, but
right?
I do know that most of the time they're not coming by even my thick cameras
Yep,
within the last 30 minutes of light.
yep, yep. So, that kind of brings up, and we talked about like the thermals and the winds a little bit in that river system. It's kind of a funny story. Years ago, when I hunted with my dad, we hunted up in Hayward, Wisconsin for 27 years. That's about a 5 hour ride from here. Back then, it was 6 hours. The speed limit was only 55. But
Yeah.
me and my dad sat on some public, right on the edge of some private, and there was just a crap load of deer that would just pour into this private egg every night. So my dad and I saw this. We got in there. We did all this. My dad was a smoker. I wasn't, but I set up down away from him, probably a few hundred yards. But I don't know. All of a sudden, about an hour before dark, there was deer blowing all over the place, and I couldn't figure out what the heck? Like the wind is coming out from the west. How the heck are they smelling us? There's no way. There's got to be something else that's scaring them. And for those of you out there who have this, like, oh, a deer's blowing over there, but the wind's going this way. It can't be me. No, it is you. It is you. There's this thing called thermals. And those thermals, especially at night, get really strong. They can sometimes overpower uh, wind, especially on the edges of a field like that where it can swirl because of the trees. Um, the big aha moment for me was when I listened to Dan Infold and got a crap ton of milkweed. I put them in little medicine bottles actually, and I carried this little medicine bottle packed full of milkweed, and I just started like throwing milkweed out. Now it wasn't that is in the swamps as much where I would notice it as big. I mean, it would drop down, but when I went into hill country, that amplifies it like 100 times, and you could really see how those thermals and those winds work with each other or against each other, tree lines, whatever. And man, that upped my game by 200% right there. Just that alone. If a guy really wants to do better at his hunting, get some milkweed, learn how those winds and thermals work with each other, man. It's just crazy, crazy.
I'm glad you mentioned on that because I mean it's preached up and down. It's a well-known thing now. You know, you got to pay attention to thermals and wind, but there's still a lot of people who and my dad, a little bit of an old school hunter. He's still you know the wind is so variable up here in the North Woods. It's all timber. You know, I just don't even worry about it. Don't even think about it. And there's a couple well-known hunters who believe in scent prevention and keeping your scent reduced who say I don't worry about the wind. And in my head, all I'm saying is if a buck lives his day to day by the wind and how can you ignore it?
Yeah,
Like that's
yeah.
the thing that's keeping him alive 80% of the time over sight and vision is how he's using the terrain to to catch the
Honestly,
ambush waiting for him.
honestly, I get scent free soap, body wash, real cheap at Walmart. I don't buy the hunting stuff because that's always
Yep.
twice the price. And I do when I wash my clothes, I'll hang them on my clothesline and let them air dry. That's the most I do for scent control. I don't use sprays. I don't use any of that. Especially these last 4 or 5 years, I've been shooting a mature buck every year for the last 5 years. Knock on wood, getting lucky, I guess. But
That's very
that being
impressive.
said, I, it's the wind and the thermals, man. People, they read into this. The more money they spend, the better chance they have at a deer. I'm telling you, milkweed is free, and it'll give you the advantage 200% more than any kind of scent control out there. So that being said, if you do follow scent control and it works for you, that's awesome. But for me, I don't do it. I mean, let's think about it. I was in Nebraska last year for that challenge with Dan Infalt
Is that the
and
Battle of the Bows one?
Battle of the Bulls. And actually, it was almost 100 degrees there. Now, you tell me what kind of scent control is going to help me at that temperature. I was seeing deer every day, just not the right deer that I wanted, but always on deer. Like it was crazy awesome. It was fun, but man, it was hot. It was
Yeah.
so hot. But
Um, yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, it's not a damn thing you can do if you're walking in more than 100 yards. If you're, I mean, I'm hot blooded, so I'm sweating no matter what the temperature is.
yeah, it was at
All you
100
can do is
degrees.
try to stack those external odds, like the environmental odds, because your body's going to produce it. And
Yeah,
I think the pieces, and one thing that I think I don't want to speak for you, but one thing that in my eyes would definitely help, and I feel like maybe I've come from a little bit of this myself, just spending a lot of time in the woods as a kid and the woodsmanship, like you trapping for so long and running 100 trail cameras. Like I talked a little bit about that in my summer trail cam video was buy a lot of cheap cell cameras is what I recommended to every new guy because every
yeah,
camera, or sorry, not cell camera, but buy a cheap cameras. The more the better, whatever you can afford because every time you hang a camera, you're making a choice about what you think a deer is doing. And then you're getting confirmation, whether you hunt off that or not. And the more choices you make, you hang 100 in a season, you're making so many more choices and getting so much more information about spots that deer really like and what they don't really like, especially for moving in daylight and in dark. And when you have that kind of woodsmanship from trapping and hanging lots of cameras, and then you start to think about, well, why was that deer there at that time? The wind and thermals piece just comes easier. Oh, well, I've seen them move like this before on my cameras.
yeah,
They must be doing this. And I feel
yeah,
like if you don't have that experience, just going out and thinking wind and like get some confirmation, build up that knowledge base, and like spend as much time in the woods
yep.
confirming that or denying that or proving yourself wrong. Sometimes better than proving yourself right because you're. But I think that goes a long ways for hunters today.
I just honestly, I love um, putting them over scrapes. Man, that is, everybody likes to see get deer pictures. Come on, let's face it. You see a lot of does, little bucks. It does kind of get you excited, but in reality, it doesn't help me with the mature bucks. The mature bucks are completely different. So if you're putting them out there on some old deer trail that chances are pretty good you're going to get the immature bucks and the does and the fawns, and you're missing out on where those mature bucks are. So you kind of got to think differently. You got to think more along the lines of what they would do. So, which kind of leads me to like 5 years ago, when I was at Dan Infalt's swamp deal, um, I met Josh Tolker, and me and two good friends of mine were talking about going to Indiana for a hunt. And he introduced himself, and he's like, because you have to say where you're from. He said he's from Indiana. So I talked to him and said, hey, we're kind of we're looking at doing our first out of state hunt. We don't need spots. We just kind of need rules, regulations, and maybe kind of areas like
Because
what
you were looking to do public, right?
right, public, correct. And he says, talk to me after we're done, and we'll kind of go from there. And I talked to him, and yeah, we talked. We talked for like 2 hours, and we hit it off. He invited us out there by him, and we went to Hoosier National. And now, mind you, I've never really hunted real hill country before, not like this. This is serious stuff here. So I was in for a surprise. But anyways, we got into some areas where we're all kind of scouting together, and Josh is trying to explain things on hill country and stuff, and pointing me out some information. There was some books and stuff that I could read. But anyways, we got into this hub system. Now, of course, back then I didn't know that was a hub system and what that all meant. We got in this hub system. I found a real good rub line going through, some good scrapes in this hub, and hub scrapes. Now, that's what I would call them, but I didn't know at that time. And we actually found their bedding on the sides of the hills. And it was really super cool. So this was during the summer. When I went back to hunt October 1st, actually, it's kind of funny. We were staying in a campsite at that time, a campground, and I printed off my license at work, left it in my work pants, but before I left, I changed clothes. Well, in Indiana, you have to have a printed license, so I couldn't
On
hunt.
you while you're hunting?
Yeah, first morning I couldn't hunt because I forgot my license at home. Now I got to find a place that'll print off my license. Well, it was a state campground. They called the CO and said, "Yeah, as long as you got a screenshot of your license, that'll work too." I'm like, darn it. But anyways, midday, I turn around. I had three cameras there. The first camera I checked was on old railroad grade that's no longer there, and I had a real decent 9-pointer that was making his way through, but he disappeared during the shift. All right, so I checked that camera. I kiboshed to that spot. Mind you, I've never hunted there before, so I'm just kind of trying to figure things out. I get to the
Because
second camera.
you've only scouted there like one trip in the summertime
Yeah,
when obviously things look there. Okay, so yeah, it's a
so
major
they look
learning.
different too. So I go to the second camera. It was on a nice community scrape that I had found, and there was a couple good bucks on there, but there hadn't been anything on there in the last week. So I thought, all right, he shifted too. So now it's getting crunch time. I had to figure out, okay, where I'm going to hunt. So the third camera I had was that camera and that hub system where I found the nice scrape and the rub line and found their beds, and there was a crop field nearby. This hub system led down to a crop field. And I get over there and I'm making my way in. The wind is just right. It starts drizzling. I love it when it drizzles. Those bucks love to move. This is something from trapping days and from when I used to have beagles running rabbits. Deer love wet, moist days because they can smell better. Your scent particles travel better on those wet, moist days than they do the dry days. So those bucks are more apt to move early or all day on rainy days. So, but anyways, I get over. I'm in this area. It's a hub system, and there's a small creek that goes through it, and every spring it floods over. The whole place floods over. So I have ground brush that goes up to like 8 feet high, and then there's absolutely nothingness because there's mature trees in there. And then you have the canopy that's real high, but you can't see anything really from the ground up to that 8 foot, 10 foot level because all these bushes and stuff. But anyways, I put my stand up kind of in this bushes, so my bottom, my knees and everything were down low, and just the top part of me was just up so I could look down onto that trail where that scrape is. So I thought, all right, well, you know what? My camera is on the other side of the trail. I screwed up, and this is something that
Walk
people
across.
want to think about. You have to walk
That's a
across that
good one to
trail.
mention. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, so I had to walk down like 70 yards, cross the trail, and then come back up and pull the cart and then go back to my stand. So here I am. I'm going through these pictures. So I'm like, oh my God, holy cow, there are some real good ones in here. I'm like, there are three real good ones in there. Real good. There's two that were just giant, and there was a third one, a nice big 8 pointer. First time there, I'm going to shoot it. So
Oh, sure.
I, uh, I am sitting in a stand, and I don't know, about an hour into this hunt, all of a sudden I look and I see these two big brown eyes coming down that trail, and right up to that scrape. And he was, man. Mature bucks move different than any other bucks out there. You'll see them. They'll walk a little bit. They'll scan. They'll stop. They'll smell. They'll walk a little bit. They'll do that. Man, finally he gets to a spot where I could get a shot off him, and he could see he was trying to look up underneath these bushes to see, if it's safe, but he
I
wasn't
got a
looking
quick
up. I was only like 10 feet in the air, and he
I got
wasn't
a quick
looking up
question
at me.
about so you're set up like in that thick ground level brush. You got your
Yep.
stand set up where it's breaking your outline. Is that scrape where your camera is? Is that like on the edge of the thick stuff where it kind of starts going uphill, or is that in the thicker area too?
It's actually, it's kind of a little bit of an opening because it's at the base of a ridge line. It's hard to explain, like a drainage that goes down, and
Yep.
there's a ridge that runs parallel to it. And it leads out to a crop field. And
Okay.
here I am. Here he comes, and I was just like, I was pretty worked up because, man, he was so like in tune with what was going on, and excuse me, he finally takes that step, and I shoot, and I knew it was a good shot, but you always doubt yourself every time. That's just who I am. But and he runs straight up this hill. This hill is, well, it's a typical southern Indiana hill, like straight up like Billy Goat Hill. And I don't hear anything anymore. So I was like, what just happened there? So here I am. I pack all my stuff up and I start heading out to the road because I have no signal where I'm at. I have to get my truck, drive up to somewhere where I can send a text message to my two buddies that are along and to Josh Choker. Well, Josh, we weren't hunting together per se, but we were in touch with each other. And he's like, well, don't, if you just wait for us, because he was out hunting with his dad. He said, well, I'd like to videotape the recovery. And good thing I did, because that buck went straight up that hill and went down the backside, probably 2/3 the way, and died there. So what happened is I kind of like shish kebabbed him. I went in, and it went in the front and then came out near the hind quarter. And man, he dressed out at 209 pounds,
Woo.
and we drug him. It was a long ways.
And
We
is that October 1st?
Yeah, October
That's a
1st,
huge
a couple
body
hours
weight for
into it.
that early in the season. That's
Yeah.
gigantic. And in those hills, I don't envy you for that.
So then it wasn't that next year. That next year we had such an acorn drop. I've never seen it in my life. Whoever thinks they have acorn drops where they're walking on marbles, that's nothing. There was big floating bogs of acorns coming down the creeks and stuff. I just couldn't get on anything. Those deer didn't even have to get out of their beds and get hit on the head with acorns. There were so many. So the deer movement was almost none. But then the year after, or actually, I shouldn't even say that, that next spring, is when I started realizing about hubs and hub scrapes. All these areas that I was finding that I was getting all these good pictures of bucks on were hub scrapes. And I started like talking to what's his name from Latitude about
Jake Bush.
yeah, about because he was hunting the same kind of stuff as me, and all of a sudden we're just like, oh my god, it just dawned on me like, yeah, these hub scrapes and how they're bedding in these hills and what to look for was the answer to what is working for me. Finding these C-shaped hubs that led to crop fields and in the right direction too for wind wise. That's
Hmm.
so I may go into 10 hubs, but only one hub might be actually good. So of course I'll drop some cameras in there and then man, I just really getting on them that way in southern Indiana. It's that was my aha moment when I started realizing, okay, what I'm hunting is these hubs, and these are these hub scrapes, and these beds are up on these edges, wind dependent, and man, what a difference that's made. I got on a good buck opening day last year, shot him, and it got onto some private, and I couldn't get access to get in there to get. The guy didn't deny me, I just couldn't get a hold of him. He wasn't answering.
Oh,
It was
that's tough.
90,
That's the
90
worst.
degrees. Yeah, it's 90 degrees. People are like messaging me, just go get him. I'm like, no, I can't morally do it because if I just can't without the guy's permission. Yeah, that's on Behind the Echo with Josh Choker. That hunt, it was
You
pretty
got that
cool.
one on video?
Yep, yep. So
Very nice.
yeah, so that was another one of those aha moments. But just
Now,
to
those
kind of,
hubs, sorry, yeah, go on.
oh no, go ahead.
I just had a question. You mentioned the wind dependent for your hubs. I've not hunted a ton of hill country before at all. I've listened to some stuff about it, but when you're talking about how that sets up, just for folks who are listening, maybe don't hunt hill country either, you're talking about like a C-shaped, basically a bowl, right, where the ridge
Yep,
wraps around, and then the points of those ridges were kind of pointing toward their food source, so like downhill, they have like a bottom field. And then are you hunting that? Because I mean, a lot of the stuff that came out 10, 15, 20 years ago was always just stay out of the lowlands, stay out of the bottoms in the evening because the wind swirls. But are you waiting for that wind to kind of come down through the sea, like cutting the
yep,
sea like this, blowing toward the destination? Is that what
yep,
you're doing?
yep.
And then
So
there's some kind of big scrape down in that bottom that you're setting up on, expecting him to hit on his way through.
well, to a point. Now, I shot a good one 2 years ago. That's also on Before the Echo. There was a real nice 10 pointer. And, anyways, that particular hub system, I had cameras on the hub scrape, but I didn't hunt the hub scrape. I didn't even know he was there till after I shot him, honestly. I found a good shed in there. I knew how they were using it, I knew where they were bedding. So I put the camera on the hub scrape, but I never even had a chance. It was a do or it was either I'm hunting it or I'm screwed because it's a giant ass hill to get over. It is not for the weary. You better be in shape, and you have to go back down the hill to get into this hub system. So what I did was I hunted up closer to their bedding area, and just like just exactly like just perfect. Just like somebody wrote a book, wrote the story. You came down right out of that bedding, you made a rub, you could see the tree moving around, and he came right down perfect. And I was probably 2/3 the way up that hub system at that point. I was probably within 150 yards where I feel he's bedding. But there's these ridges, they're like fingers that come off this hill, this hub system, and they actually run those. They shouldn't say they run them, but they'll walk those down because that's the easiest way. Otherwise, they're like, and he came right down one of those fingers, the one that I figured he was coming down. And it was funny because the first shot that I shot him, he was actually at the same height as me, and he was quartering towards me, and it was only like a 25-yard shot. And I shot it, hit him behind the front shoulder, and that's all I knew. And yeah, I got the camera rolling or whatever. Then he runs down this hill and stops perfectly on my right side. So he went from my 1 o'clock to my 3 o'clock. In the meantime, I get another one arrow put in, and because he's standing there just like in shock, and then I put one through the two front shoulders. He spun
Wow.
around and he ran off, and I could hear him, gurgling like. So I knew he was dead. But whenever you're that far in the hill country, you want to make sure. Okay, I got an arrow in him, but I wasn't 100% sure where I got an arrow in him. So if he's standing there broadside, I got to put another one in because I don't want him to run off. We're talking miles and miles and miles of ridges here. I can't, good chance you're going to lose him if you don't. So I picked up all my stuff and my stand, everything, walked back up that giant hill, back down. Actually, got to the top of the hill. I texted Josh and I said, because he was hunting probably a couple miles from me. We were, well, hunting together, but separate. And I got one down. He doesn't have a signal. And so I go back to the truck, go back to his house, and I wait for him. And all of a sudden he calls me and he's like, "Where are you at?" I said, "Man, your house waiting for you." I said, "I'm going to need help on this one." So he's like, "Well, get back over here. Let's go get him." I said, "Now you don't want to eat first?" He's like, "Yeah, no, let's go get him." So here we go, back up the hill, back down the hill. I couldn't find him. Like literally, I think Josh was kind of like, "Dude, you're losing your mind. There's no way." We
Is it
couldn't find
dark?
blood or
Dark
anything.
at that point,
Boy,
right?
it's black dark. And I just felt like a idiot. Like, how the heck? I could hear him dying. Like, there's just no way. You'll see in the video where he's like, "Hey Gary, I think I found some blood." And so I come because we're just about ready to give up and go back in the morning. I go running over there and there's the thing laying there, and I'm like, "Oh." Yeah, he dressed out at 209 pounds.
Wow.
Or no, he dressed out bigger. I'm guessing him to be 230. We had to quarter him out, get him out. He was a 5.5-year-old, real
Beautiful.
one, and we didn't get back till like 2 in the morning. And of course, Josh is like,
Wow.
"Yeah, I gotta wish I would have went back to the house to eat first."
Got some food in the belly before you
Yeah, yeah,
hacked
yeah,
out 100
yeah,
pounds over the hills. Yeah.
yeah.
Oh,
Oh,
that's cool, man.
it was a great hunt. So
Um,
that wasn't
so
that hub
you,
system, a different hub system.
I'm assuming you went up, maybe it wasn't when you hung the camera, which would have been earlier before season, but at some point you must have gone in before season and I don't know if you would go spring or summer and located that bedding area.
Yeah,
Did you step foot in the top of that ridge where you thought he was going to be or down the ridge? And then you assumed, okay, he's going to take one of these points down. You'd already located that.
yep, yep. So that spring, uh, I actually found a big shed in there. There was a bigger buck than that was in there, and I found his shed, and I spent hours and hours. I actually went in there for 2 days, and figured out how they were using it. It took all 2 days too, but I figured out where he was bedding, what ridge, what finger he was coming down. I mean, everything. It was just storybook. And when I came up the bottom of the hub, and you have to. I was working my way up. You have to be careful because you don't want to overshoot where you want to hunt because now you're leaving scent. Man,
Mm-hmm.
the hill country deer are super sensitive to scent because let's face it, there's miles and miles, not as much people intrusion. So you really have to be careful. And I get up to an area and I could hear acorns dropping, white oak acorns dropping, and I could see that flat, but I didn't want to get into the flat because I felt as though that buck was going to come down that ridge line. And man, it was perfect. it was kind of funny. I just got set up and a doe came, crossed right in front of me at 20 yards, and she went straight over to that flat and started eating. And then all of a sudden I saw him come out of his bedding. Man, he was really working up that tree, and he came down finally. I got that shot at him. But sometimes better is less, or less is better, I should say. Don't try to push too far in hill country, because the reason why they're in these areas, they can see you easier than you can see them.
Having not hunted a ton of hill country, but some down in Illinois, a little bit of hill country, not as big as Indiana stuff, but the less is more thing would be really helpful in a lot of instances where they can see it with the number of deer also, because that's one of the things that I've kind of run into. A lot of the brushy lowland stuff here in Wisconsin, those deer have their spots, they're somewhat spread out, but they can't really see anything,
Yeah.
even like other deer. So they hear stuff running, but they don't know what's going on. Whereas in more open hill country, if you push a little too far and you bump a group of does and they go tearing across right through that, like, well, now you're going for a big hike up and over some more hills, because like they probably just busted out a whole bunch of deer because they can just see and have that visual advantage so much more than in flat brushy terrain.
What I do notice though is, if I do kick some does up, that's not the end all be all. A lot of times those mature bucks, because those does will get up at some of the stupidest reasons, and they'll run off like it's almost like retarded. And those bucks know this too, and they're comfortable. That's their home. So if a doe goes running by, yeah, they'll be alert, but I don't. They're not going to get up and run with them. But at
Gotcha.
least that's what I notice with mature bucks. Maybe sometimes they do, but a lot of times I feel as though that they're like, okay, what the hell's her problem? But yeah, uh,
Yeah, I feel like they almost have to have their own confirmation of something. Do you know what I mean?
yep,
Like
yep,
it seems like the big ones always make their own choices. Even like deer drives here in Wisconsin, all the deer will do this, but the big
yep.
one, he's doing his own thing. He's either first one out, last one out, or he didn't get out at all. And I think maybe just what you said, he's got to have his own confirmation of seeing, smelling, hearing something that doesn't sound right for him to get up. So maybe I guess that's an advantage we have as hunters.
Well, it's funny that you talk about that. Yeah, I learned those hill country things in Indiana, but then Brian invited me over by him from Good Sit on some public land, and I chose some public land areas that were hilly, because that's what I like. That's what I'm good at. I mean, I like swamps and I'm good at swamps, but I really dig in this hill country stuff. So I hunted for like 3 days in this one piece, getting a lot of hunter intrusion. I decided I needed a different change. So Brian and I looked at some maps. There's another piece of public. He's never hunted before. He had a camera in there, nothing really big at all, mature, a lot of 2 and 3 year olds. But I just I was I needed a different pace, something different. I get into this area. There's no other hunters. I hunted it. We picked a spot that we both felt that I could get into in the dark, and then from there I could just kind of feel my way around. I get into this spot, and sure enough, here comes a guy. He sat down 60 yards from me, and he was hunting. And I'm not mad because he didn't know where I was. I mean, I'm like a mile in off the road. Like he ain't gonna know. So I did hear some good grunting on the private ground that was near me, and I saw a spike buck and some does, but they were coming from a little bit further east on this property, and I knew there was a drainage that went through. There was a hub system. When Susie say hub system, I'm on it. Like I saw it, I was like, I need to get in there. And man, it was a C-shaped hub that started and it went down. And man, where it was just tore up with rubs, just tore up. So there was like a fence line and there was a private hill that was real. There's a bedding area, and I could tell almost immediately. And I didn't want to get too far, so I set up my stand. Now, mind you, it's been raining every day for 4 straight days, all day. I change clothes 2, 3 times a day just because it is that bad. So I get into this spot. I just get set up, man. There's just big rubs all over, and sure enough, here comes a spike buck from the direction I came from. But I don't know, about 2 o'clock ish in the afternoon, I'm just watching these bucks pour out of this bedding area, one right after the other. 10 pointers, 12 pointers, 3.5 year old, 2.5 year old. I mean, they're all nice, but I really wanted a 4.5 year old. And they're just pouring out. I think I saw like 7 bucks. And about an hour before dark, uh, I turn around and it starts downpouring. So I got to get out of there. My camera equipment's got wet. Everything is soaked. I saw a tree that I wanted to get into that next morning. So I got in there in the dark in the morning, and I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden, it's just probably 10, 15 minutes in the season. And of course, it's raining. And I look over, and here comes a doe running straight towards me, angles off right past me. Well, I know what that means. I mean, it's rut. I look, and sure enough, here comes a nice big mature 8 pointer. He stops, just like posing for me. I put the pin on him and let him have it. He ran like 30 yards and dropped right there. I mean, it was
Wow.
picture perfect. But in that hub system again, here he was chasing that doe. That's I couldn't believe it. Like it was. So of course, Brian was up in his tree stand in his own area. I don't want him to come out because he only gets a few days to be able to hunt. So here I have to quarter him out. I think I'm a mile and a quarter, and I have to go up this giant hill, uphill all the way there, and of course downhill all the way back. I had to make 3 trips. I think or three or
Wow.
4 trips. It ended up being 12 miles by the end of the day. I had to go
Wow.
back to late. I drove straight back to Indiana, and I started hunting over there. Then everyone went home. But yeah, this hub systems are if you know how to use them and know how to work them, and you're in hill country, learn it and also learn those scents and those thermals. And man, it really pays off.
It seems like as you mentioned, you already kind of figured out you'd hunted a few of those hub systems before. So walking into that one in that area, and all of a sudden, as soon as you saw probably the first good rub, I had to imagine you were drooling a little bit, and like,
Oh
okay,
yeah,
game on,
yeah,
and you
yeah.
knew kind
I
of what
knew
you
those
needed
other
to
ones
do.
couldn't have done those rubs. You know, I mean, they were respectable, but they weren't mature. I'm hoping maybe a couple of those made it for this year because man, they'll be really good. It's
Will
funny
you
because
be back?
Eric, what's that? I'm sorry.
Will you be back in that area again this year?
Yeah, I actually made a trip there this summer and put some cameras up. But yeah, I'll definitely be back. I
Cool.
try to find more areas to hunt. Illinois is hard on non-residents. There are some public land areas. I get there and the sign says residents only. I've never heard of that. Like public land's public land. Wow. So it just every area that I wanted to go scout just was resident only. So
It's a tricky state to hunt with different rules and regulations in CWD counties. Some of them close archery season during that.
yeah,
Some of them don't. I've called down there when we've been down there to figure out where I can hunt, and I want to verify with a warden or an officer. And I got two different answers from three different people. I was like, which one of them is right? So,
yeah. There's
I mean,
draw
they didn't even
areas.
know what was
I put
going
in
on.
I put in for a draw area, didn't draw. It's like, gosh, man, this is tough. But
Yeah.
that's all right. I dig challenges. I'll go back and I'll smash one. And it's kind of funny, these hub systems and stuff. All this, talk about hub scrapes and all that. Rendell Eric has been to my house. He hunted with me last year. We hunted quite a bit together last year. And he's like, yeah, dude, every hub system is going to have a hunter in it. You're never going to get. I said, I'm going to prove you wrong, and I'm going to shoot one in a hub system. And yeah, I actually shot two, but the one got into that private. So, uh,
That's too bad.
yeah, yeah, but it's fun. It's fun. So,
Well,
yes,
cool,
sir.
man. I can't wait to see. I can't. I mean, you mentioned before on the phone, you got quite a line of states you're planning on hitting this year. So I'm really excited to see
Yeah,
how
he's
you do.
here.
You got an Iowa tag, is that right?
Yeah, for muzzleloader. So pretty much any state with the letter I, I'm hunting this year. Iowa, Indiana, and Illinois, and in Wisconsin. Yeah.
Oh, that's
So
great, man.
that's the letter of the year, I.
Well, I hope you make do on a few of those tags. I'm sure you will, and maybe after the season we can get you back on and hear what you learned and what helped you this season. Because it's been really nice talking with you and hearing some stories. You got some great stories, a lot of knowledge you shared, so I appreciate it, Gary.
Yeah, no problem. Hopefully, this helps somebody out. Maybe get their biggest personal best this year.
Well, that's the thing, right? That's why you do it, because if it helps one person or helps
Yeah,
that aha moment where all of a sudden they were walking and go, oh, this is what they were, and look at
yeah.
it, and that's why we do it, help everybody out. So I want to say thank you for taking the time this morning and dealing with my technology, tomfoolery, all of that. Um,
No
I
problem.
definitely, I definitely got to get going. My son just came down and said he accidentally blessed his daughter's or his sister's lips. So I got to go make sure they're doing okay. But it was good talking with you, Gary, and let's stay in touch, especially about your eye state takeover.
Yeah. Sounds
All right.
good, Derek.
Thanks a lot, buddy. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.